Tom lived in a quiet neighborhood at the edge of the county. His small brick house sat at the corner of Pine Street, surrounded by tall oak trees and a white wooden fence that he had painted by hand years ago. The place was peaceful, filled with the sounds of birds and the laughter of children riding bicycles. For Tom, it was a home he had cared for with love, and he liked the calm rhythm of life it offered. On a bright Saturday morning, Tom was outside working on his mailbox. The wooden post had become a little shaky after a storm, and he wanted to fix it before it leaned too far. With a hammer in one hand and nails in his pocket, he worked patiently. Neighbors walked by, greeting him with friendly waves. Maria, who lived across the street, carried a basket of laundry and called out, "Morning, Tom. The weather looks good for fixing things today." Tom smiled back and replied, "Morning, Maria. Perfect day for it." Just as he placed the last nail into the post, a black car rolled slowly down the street. It was not a car Tom recognized. The windows were dark and the engine hummed low. The car stopped right in front of his yard. From the front seat, two men stepped out. They wore dark pants and shirts with badges pinned to their chests. At first glance, they looked like police officers, but something about their uniforms seemed unusual. Their shirts were wrinkled, and their shoes were not the type officers usually wore. One of the men, tall and broad with a stern expression, walked up to Tom. He held out a badge quickly, not giving Tom time to study it. "Sir, you are under arrest for breaking community rules," the man declared. Tom paused, still holding his hammer. "Breaking what rules?" he asked calmly. The other man, shorter and younger, stepped forward and added, "The rules set by the Homeowners Association. You failed to follow them, and now you must come with us." Tom raised an eyebrow. He had lived in this neighborhood for years and knew the HOA rules well. He also knew that while the HOA could issue warnings or fines, they had no power to arrest anyone. Something about this entire scene felt wrong. He looked at their badges again. The shine was cheap, and the edges looked like they were made of plastic. "I think you should explain exactly what law I broke," Tom said, his voice steady. The tall man crossed his arms. "You left your trash bin outside past the allowed time. You also painted your fence without getting approval. These are serious violations." "Now come with us," Tom almost laughed, but he kept his face calm. "Leaving a trash bin out is not a crime. Painting a fence is not a crime either." "Who exactly sent you here?" Neither of the men answered directly. Instead, they repeated, "We are here to take you in. Do not resist." At that moment, Maria came walking down her driveway. She noticed the two men and stopped, looking confused. "Tom, is everything all right?" she called out. The tall man glared at her. "Stay back, ma'am." "This is official business," Maria frowned. She had lived in the neighborhood long enough to know the real county officers. These two men were strangers, and their uniforms looked odd to her as well. She whispered, "Tom, I don't think they're real." Tom gave her a small nod, then turned back to the men. "If you are real officers, then show me proper identification, and tell me which department you belong to." The shorter man shifted uncomfortably. His hand hovered near his belt, but there was no radio, no handcuffs, no standard police equipment. Tom noticed this detail clearly. They looked like actors in costumes rather than real lawmen. After a long pause, the tall man said, "We don't need to answer your questions. We have orders from the HOA president, Greg. He said you refused to follow the rules, and now we have the authority to take you in." Tom's suspicion was confirmed. These were not real officers. They were people hired by Greg, the president of the HOA. Greg had always been strict and controlling. For years, he had sent letters and warnings to neighbors about small things: grass that grew too high, garden decorations that he thought looked unapproved, even holiday lights left on for too many days. Most people gave in to his demands, but Tom had always stood firm. He paid fair dues, kept his home tidy, and followed reasonable rules. But he refused to bow down to rules that were unfair or unnecessary. Greg did not like that. Tom looked the two men straight in the eyes. "I know who sent you. But here's the thing. You are not real officers, and you have no authority over me. Now get off my property." The tall man's face darkened. He stepped closer, trying to intimidate Tom. "Listen here. You better cooperate, or things will get difficult for you." Maria gasped softly from across the street, ready to call for help. A few other neighbors peeked from behind curtains and doors, watching the scene unfold. The air grew heavy with tension, but Tom stood calmly, hands steady, voice firm. I'm not afraid. You can tell Greg that if he has a problem, he can speak to me directly. Sending fake officers is not only dishonest, it's a crime." The shorter man whispered something to the tall one. They both looked uneasy now, realizing Tom was not going to be scared into submission. After a moment of silence, they turned back toward their car. The tall man gave one last glare and said, "You'll regret this. The HOA doesn't let people get away with disobedience." With that, they climbed into the black car and drove away, leaving behind a trail of confusion and whispers among the neighbors. Maria hurried over to Tom's yard. "Tom, what was that about? They looked like they were trying to trick you." Tom wiped his hands on his work cloth and nodded. "They were not real. Greg sent them, I'm sure of it. He wants to scare me, but it won't work." Maria shook her head in disbelief. "That man is going too far. First he complains about flower colors and lawn lengths, and now he's sending people dressed as officers. Something has to be done." Tom gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Maria, I'll handle this. But for now, let's keep this quiet. I want to see how far Greg is willing to go." The neighbors slowly came out of their homes murmuring about what they had seen. Some were frightened, others angry, but all of them looked to Tom with respect. He had stood his ground without fear. As the sun lowered in the sky, Tom returned to his house, finished with his mailbox repairs. But in his mind, he was already planning his next move. He knew Greg's scheme was more than just pettiness, it was a test of control. And Tom was not a man who let others control him. What Greg and the rest of the HOA didn't know was that Tom was more than just a homeowner. He was the chief running this county, and he had the power to uncover the truth and bring justice. For now, though, he stayed quiet, watching and waiting, knowing that the game had only just begun. The next morning, Tom woke earlier than usual. The memory of the strange visit from the two fake officers was still fresh in his mind. He sat at his kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, watching the sunlight spread across his backyard. The quiet of the house felt heavy. Tom had seen many unusual things in his life, but never had he expected his own neighborhood to become the stage for such a trick. He replayed the details again and again. The cheap badges, the awkward uniforms, the way the tall man had refused to answer his questions. Everything pointed to one person, Greg, the HOA president. Greg had always been strict, but now his actions showed he had crossed a line. Tom finished his coffee and stood up. He knew he could not ignore what had happened, but he also knew he had to move carefully. The neighbors trusted him, and many of them had grown tired of Greg's controlling ways. Still, they were too afraid to speak out. If Tom acted too soon, Greg might twist the story and make himself look like the victim. Later that day, Tom stepped outside to check his yard. He noticed Maria walking toward him with a notebook in her hand. Her face showed concern, but also determination. "Tom," she said softly, "I couldn't sleep last night. I kept thinking about those men. They didn't just look fake, they looked nervous, like they weren't used to pretending. I wrote down the car's license plate before they left." She opened her notebook and showed him a number she had carefully written down. Tom smiled at her sharp thinking. "That's very helpful, Maria, thank you. This will make things easier." Maria hesitated, then whispered, "What are you going to do?" "For now," Tom replied, "I'll just keep watching. Greg wants control, but I want to understand how far he's willing to go. If we rush, we lose the chance to see the truth." Maria nodded, though she still looked uneasy. She trusted Tom, but she also feared what Greg might do next. That evening, the HOA held its monthly meeting in the community hall near the park. Usually, Tom avoided these gatherings. He disliked the way Greg spoke to the neighbors, treating them less like members of a community and more like students being scolded by a teacher. But this time, Tom decided to attend. When he entered the hall, the room was filled with quiet chatter. Neighbors sat in rows of metal chairs waiting for the meeting to begin. At the front, Greg stood in a suit, adjusting his tie and shuffling papers. His voice carried across the room as he announced, "We must all follow the rules if we want a beautiful neighborhood. Those who do not follow the rules bring down the value of everyone's homes." Tom sat near the back, listening carefully. He noticed how Greg avoided eye contact with him. That was unusual. Normally, Greg enjoyed pointing Tom out as an example of stubbornness. But tonight, Greg spoke in general terms, warning about rule breakers without naming anyone. When the meeting ended, a few neighbors gathered near Tom. They whispered quietly, afraid of being overheard. One man, Peter, leaned closer and said, Tom, we saw what happened yesterday. We saw those men at your yard. That was not right. A woman beside him added, Greg is going too far. Last week he told me my flower pots were the wrong color. He threatened to fine me if I didn't change them. Tom listened patiently. Their voices were low, but their frustration was clear. More neighbors joined in, sharing their own stories. Some had been fined for leaving toys in their yards, others for painting their doors without permission. It was then Tom realized that the problem was bigger than himself. Greg had been using the HOA as his personal tool of control, making the neighbors live in fear of small mistakes. The fake officers were not just about Tom. They were about sending a message to everyone else. Tom thanked them quietly and told them not to worry. I will handle this, he said firmly. His calm tone gave them comfort, even though none of them knew his true role in the county. The next day, Tom decided to learn more. He drove into town and visited the county records office. With his position, he had access to many files that regular people could not see. He asked for documents about the HOA's recent actions and any unusual complaints. The clerk, a friendly man named Daniel, pulled out a folder. Inside, Tom found several letters written by Greg to the county office. The letters were filled with complaints about his own neighbors, claiming they were lowering property values and demanding stronger authority for the HOA. Greg even suggested that the HOA should have the right to remove people who did not fit the community. Image. Tom closed the folder with a sigh. Greg was not just strict. He was trying to build power for himself. He wanted control over people's homes, their choices, even their daily lives. That evening, Tom returned home and saw Maria waiting at his porch with a plate of warm bread. She handed it to him and asked, Did you find out anything? Tom nodded slowly. Yes, Greg has been writing letters asking for more authority. He wants to rule this neighborhood like it's his own kingdom. Maria's eyes widened. That's terrible. But what can we do? He scares everyone. Tom looked out at the street where children were playing under the glow of the streetlights. We wait a little longer. The truth always shows itself. Greg will make another move, and when he does, we'll be ready. The following week, signs began to appear around the neighborhood. They were printed notices posted on lampposts and mailboxes. The sign said, New community security team will enforce rules. Obey or face removal. The neighbors grew restless. Some asked, Who is this security team? Are they real officers? Others feared more men like the ones who had come to Tom's yard. The air of peace in the neighborhood was breaking, replaced by quiet worry. One night, Tom was walking his dog along Pine Street when he saw Greg talking with two men near the park. Tom recognized them immediately. They were the same men who had come in the black car. They were not gone after all. They were still working for Greg. Tom stopped in the shadows, listening. Greg's voice was low but sharp. You will keep patrolling. If anyone questions you, tell them you are with the new HOA security. Do not let people disobey. They must learn to fear consequences. The men nodded, then walked away. Tom's eyes narrowed. It was worse than he thought. Greg was building his own version of a police force, one that answered only to him. As Tom walked back home, he knew the time for quiet watching was coming to an end. His neighbors were counting on him, even if they did not know it. Greg believed he could control the community through fear and tricks, but he did not know who he was truly dealing with. Tom entered his house, closed the door behind him, and took off his jacket. He looked at the badge resting in his drawer, the badge that showed his true position as the chief of police for the entire county. Greg thought he was fighting a stubborn homeowner. In reality, he was challenging the very man who ran the law in this county. And soon Tom would show him that truth. The sun was still climbing when Tom stepped out onto his porch the next morning. The quiet street looked peaceful, but Tom knew trouble was growing beneath that calm surface. He had seen the two fake officers meet with Greg near the park. He had read the letters Greg wrote to the county office, and he had listened to the voices of neighbors who feared small fines and unfair rules. It was clear that Greg was no longer just a strict president of the HOA. He was turning the neighborhood into his personal territory. Tom walked down his driveway and greeted Maria, who was watering her flowers. She looked up at him with worried eyes. Did you sleep at all? She asked. A little, Tom replied, but sleep can wait. Greg has made his move. Now it is time for me to make mine. Maria set down her watering can. What do you mean? Tom gave a steady look. He has started a fake security team. That is not only dishonest, it is illegal. People are afraid, but they need to know the truth. I cannot stay silent anymore. Maria's hands tightened around the handle of her watering can. You are going to confront him? Tom nodded. Yes, at the next HOA meeting. And this time I will not go as just Tom the neighbor. I will go as who I really am. Maria's mouth opened in surprise, but Tom only gave her a small smile. You will understand soon enough, he said. That afternoon, Tom drove to the county office. He met with Sheriff Lane, a trusted colleague who had worked with him for years. Lane was a tall man with a calm face, and he greeted Tom with respect. Chief, Lane said, shaking Tom's hand. I heard some strange reports about your neighborhood. People say men are walking around pretending to be officers. Tom nodded. Yes, I saw them myself. They are not real. They are working for Greg, the HOA president. He is trying to scare people with fake authority. Lane's eyebrows rose. That is serious. Impersonating an officer is a crime, Tom replied firmly. I know. That is why we need to act carefully. I want to show the truth at the HOA meeting. If we move too soon, Greg will call it a mistake. But if he is exposed in front of everyone, his power will end. Lane thought for a moment, then nodded. Understood. We will be ready. Just give the signal. With that, Tom returned home. He spent the evening quietly, but inside he was preparing. He knew the next meeting would decide everything. Either Greg would continue to spread fear, or the neighborhood would be free from his control. The day of the meeting arrived. The community hall was full, more crowded than usual. Word had spread about the new security team, and people were nervous. Some whispered to each other, asking if real officers had been hired. Others avoided eye contact, not wanting to speak out. Greg stood at the front wearing his suit and tie, his voice strong and confident. Our neighborhood must stay safe and beautiful, he declared. That is why we now have a security team. They will enforce the rules, and anyone who refuses to follow them will face removal. A murmur swept through the crowd, fear mixed with confusion. Some nodded reluctantly while others looked down at their hands. At the back of the hall, Tom rose from his chair. His presence drew quiet attention, but Greg tried to ignore him. Tom walked slowly to the front. When he reached the middle of the hall, he turned to face the neighbors. His voice was calm but strong. My friends, I need to tell you the truth. The so-called security team is not real. They are not officers. They are men hired to wear fake uniforms and carry fake badges. The crowd gasped. Several people whispered loudly. Greg quickly stepped forward, his face red. That is not true. Do not listen to him. He is only trying to cause trouble. Tom looked directly at Greg. If they are real, then why do they not carry radios, proper gear, or real identification? Why do they only say they work for you, and not for the county? Greg's mouth opened, but no answer came out. The neighbors turned their eyes toward him, waiting. Tom took a breath, then reached into his jacket. He pulled out his badge, shining under the bright lights of the hall. His voice carried across the room. I am not only your neighbor. I am the chief of police for this county, and I can tell you with full authority that those men are not officers. They are imposters. The room erupted. Some people gasped, others clapped. Maria's eyes filled with relief as she looked at Tom. Greg stumbled back, his face pale. You cannot prove that. Tom raised his badge higher. I do not need to prove it. The sheriff's team is already here. They have been waiting outside, ready to confirm everything. At that signal, the doors at the back of the hall opened. Sheriff Lane and several deputies stepped in. Their real uniforms and calm, steady walk left no doubt. The neighbors watched as Lane spoke clearly. We have confirmed that 2 men have been impersonating officers under the orders of Greg, the HOA president. They will be taken into custody immediately. The deputies brought in the 2 fake officers, now in handcuffs. The crowd murmured loudly, shocked but relieved. Greg tried to protest, shouting, This is all a misunderstanding. I was only trying to keep order. But Lane shook his head. Impersonating officers is a crime. Hiring them is no misunderstanding. You have broken the trust of this community. Greg's voice grew weaker. He looked around the hall, but the neighbors no longer supported him. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. Tom spoke once more, his voice steady and kind. Rules should protect us, not control us. A neighborhood is not strong because of fear. It is strong because of trust, respect, and fairness. We will not let fear guide us anymore. The hall filled with clapping, louder this time, filled with relief and hope. Maria wiped her eyes, smiling proudly at Tom. Peter raised his hand and said, "Tom is right. We need leaders who care about us, not ones who try to scare us." Greg was led away by the deputies, his head bowed. The fake officers followed, their plan broken apart. The community hall felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. Tom lowered his badge and placed it back in his jacket. He turned to the neighbors with a gentle smile. "I am still your neighbor first. I will not interfere in your daily lives, but I will always stand against fear and dishonesty. You deserve peace in your own homes." The meeting ended with laughter, clapping, and relief. For the first time in a long while, people spoke freely, unafraid of Greg's watchful eye. Children played outside as parents talked happily in groups. Maria walked beside Tom as they left the hall. "You did it," she said softly. "You showed them the truth." Tom looked out at the neighborhood, calm but alert. This is only the beginning. Trust takes time to rebuild, but today we took the first step. The night air was cool and the streetlights glowed gently. For Tom, the battle against Greg was over. But the work of healing the community was just beginning. And deep down, Tom knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenge came next, he would always stand for his neighbors, not above them but beside them. The night after the HOA meeting was one of the quietest the neighborhood had known in a long time. People gathered outside their homes, speaking to one another in voices filled with relief. For years they had whispered in fear of Greg and his strict rules, but now they spoke openly. The shadow of his control was gone, at least for the moment. Tom sat on his porch with a notebook in his lap. His dog rested near his feet while the street around him buzzed with cheerful sounds of neighbors finally feeling free. Maria crossed the street with 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. "You changed everything," she said with a smile. "For the first time, people are laughing again." Tom nodded. "The fear is gone, but this neighborhood has to decide what comes next. Greg may be facing the law, but there will still be questions and someone will have to answer them." Maria looked thoughtful. "Do you think Greg will try to come back?" Tom sipped his tea. "The deputies have him now, but people like Greg don't give up control easily. If he finds a way, he will try again. That is why we must stay united." The next morning, letters began appearing in mailboxes. They were official notices from the county, explaining what had happened at the HOA meeting. The letters made it clear that the HOA no longer had authority under Greg's leadership. A new board would be formed and members of the community could nominate people they trusted. The neighbors gathered near the park to talk about it. Some suggested Maria, others suggested Peter, and a few even asked Tom to take the position. But Tom shook his head when the idea reached him. "I already have a duty," he said firmly. "My work belongs to the county. You need someone who will listen to you every day. Someone who will not let power change them." The neighbors understood, though many still wished for Tom's leadership. Meanwhile, Greg sat in the county jail, waiting for his case to move forward. He felt his pride slipping away with each passing hour. For years he had built himself up as the ruler of the neighborhood, making people bend to his will. Now he was just another man in a small gray cell, his suit replaced with plain clothes, his voice ignored. But Greg was not finished. Inside his mind, he planned his return. He told himself that people needed his rules, that without him, the neighborhood would fall into chaos. His stubborn belief in control gave him strength, even behind bars. Back in the neighborhood, Tom noticed small changes. Children played freely on lawns without parents worrying about fines. Families painted fences in colors they liked, and flower beds began to show more variety. The place looked more alive than it had in years. One evening, Tom walked along Pine Street and saw Peter painting his front door bright blue. Peter smiled and said, "Greg always hated bright colors.
He said they ruined the view."
"But I've wanted this door for years." Tom returned the smile. "It looks good. A home should reflect the people who live in it." Still, Tom remained watchful. He knew that even though the people were happy now, fear could return if they were not careful. Power once given away could always try to take root again. A week later, a rumor spread. Someone claimed they had seen Greg speaking to a lawyer, planning to fight back and regain his position as HOA president. The neighbors grew nervous again, their smiles fading into worried glances. At the next community gathering, voices rose with concern. "What if he comes back?" one woman asked. "What if he tries to start his rules all over again?" Tom stood up before the crowd, his voice calm. "You do not need to be afraid. Greg cannot take back power unless you give it to him. He thrived on fear. If you stand together, no rule can be forced upon you without your agreement. Remember, an HOA is meant to serve you, not control you. Maria added, Tom is right. We have lived under fear for too long. Let us choose a board that listens, not one that commands. The neighbors nodded. Hope began to return. They voted to hold an election for the new board, and volunteers came forward to serve. Maria was among them, along with Peter and 2 other kind residents. When the election day came, people arrived with cheerful energy. They filled out their votes, confident for the first time that their voices mattered. Maria was chosen as the new president, and the others joined her as board members. After the results were announced, Tom shook Maria's hand. You will do well, he said. I trust you to keep this community free of fear. Maria smiled, though her voice carried the weight of responsibility. I will do my best, Tom. And if I ever stray, I hope you will remind me of today. The neighborhood celebrated with a small fair at the park. Children ran through sprinklers, families set up picnic blankets, and laughter filled the air. It felt like a new beginning. But Tom did not forget about Greg. He kept in contact with Sheriff Lane, asking for updates on the case. Lane explained that Greg's lawyer was trying to argue that Greg had only been protecting the community. Tom shook his head when he heard it. Protection never comes through fear. Protection is built with trust. Greg never understood that, Lane agreed. The case will move forward, but it may take time. Greg is stubborn. He believes he was right. Tom continued to watch, but he also allowed himself to enjoy the peace that was growing. He attended the fair, played games with children, and shared food with neighbors. For once, he felt like just another resident, not the chief of police carrying heavy duties. As the sun set that evening, Tom stood at the edge of the park, looking at the lights strung across the trees. Maria joined him, holding a plate of food. Do you think Greg will ever change? She asked quietly. Tom shook his head. Some people cannot see beyond their own need for control. But that does not matter. What matters is that the rest of you have chosen a better path. Together you can keep this neighborhood free. Maria nodded. It feels different already. People are smiling again. Children are not afraid. Even the air feels lighter. Tom smiled gently. That is the power of unity. Fear can divide, but trust will always bring people back together. The night ended with fireworks, small but bright against the sky. Neighbors clapped and cheered, their voices echoing across Pine Street. Tom returned home with a quiet heart, knowing the tables had truly turned. Greg's control was broken, the people were stronger, and the neighborhood finally belonged to those who lived in it, not to one man's pride. The neighborhood of Pine Street was brighter than it had been in years. The heavy cloud of fear was gone, and in its place there was a spirit of togetherness. For the first time in a long while, the neighbors greeted each other with warmth, not with quick nods of caution. Children rode their bikes freely. Laughter filled the yards, and families planted flowers without worrying if their colors were approved. Tom watched these changes quietly. From his porch, he could see Maria's new rose bushes glowing red in the sunlight, Peter's bright blue door shining like a cheerful flag, and even the old playground near the park being painted by volunteers. He felt peace in his heart, but he also knew this peace had not come easily. It was earned through courage, truth, and unity. Maria often visited Tom, carrying baskets of bread or tea. She enjoyed talking with him about how the neighborhood was growing. One morning, she said with a smile, "It feels like we live in a new place, Tom. A place where people breathe easier." Tom nodded. That is what happens when fear is gone. But remember, peace is not a gift we receive once. It is something we must keep safe every day. Maria tilted her head. Do you think Greg will try again? Tom looked out at the street. Men like Greg rarely change. They may lose, but in their hearts they believe they are right. Still, it does not matter. The people are stronger now. Even if Greg returns, he will not find the same fearful neighbors he once controlled. The county's case against Greg moved forward slowly. His lawyer argued, but the evidence was clear. The 2 men he hired had already confessed to impersonating officers, and the letters he had written showed his intent to build authority beyond his role. The law would handle him, and Tom trusted that justice would be done. In the meantime, the new HOA board worked hard. Maria, as president, called for open meetings where everyone could speak freely. She said, "The HOA exists to support the community, not to frighten it. We will focus on real needs, like repairing the park, keeping the streets safe, and helping families when they need it. The neighbors welcomed the change. They donated time, money, and effort. Soon, the park had new benches, the playground had fresh paint, and the walking paths were clean. The neighborhood became a place of pride again, not because of strict rules, but because people cared for one another. One afternoon, a storm swept through the county. Heavy rain knocked down branches and strong winds scattered trash. When it ended, Tom stepped outside to see the damage. But before he could pick up the first branch in his yard, his neighbors arrived. Maria came with gloves, Peter brought tools, and children followed with buckets. Together, they cleaned the street, repaired fences, and lifted the fallen tree near the park. Tom stood in the middle of the effort, his heart full. He realized that the true strength of a neighborhood was not in its fences or its flowers, but in its people. They had faced fear, and now they stood together against storms and troubles alike. Later that evening, when the work was done, Maria sat on Tom's porch. Her clothes were wet from the rain, but her eyes shone. "We did it together, Tom," she said. "Yes," Tom replied, "and that is what will keep this place strong. Not rules, not fear, just people helping each other." As the days turned into weeks, word of what had happened on Pine Street spread across the county. Other neighborhoods learned about Greg's downfall and Tom's quiet strength. Some people came to visit, curious to see the place where neighbors had stood up for themselves. They saw the bright doors, the lively gardens, and the smiling faces. Many returned home inspired to bring the same spirit to their own streets. One evening, the new HOA board organized a celebration in the park. Lights were strung across the trees, tables were filled with food, and music played softly. Families gathered under the stars, enjoying the freedom they had gained. Maria stood at the front, holding a small microphone. Her voice was filled with gratitude. "We gather tonight not to celebrate rules, but to celebrate each other. We have learned that power belongs not to one person, but to all of us together. May we never forget that unity is stronger than fear." The crowd cheered and laughter followed. Tom stayed near the back, quietly watching. He did not seek praise, but many neighbors approached him with thanks. Children handed him drawings they had made of their homes, painted with bright doors and colorful gardens. Peter clapped him on the shoulder. "You may not want to lead the HOA, Tom, but you will always be our guide." Tom smiled but said nothing. In his heart, he knew his role was larger than this street. As chief of police, he carried duties for the entire county. But here, in this neighborhood, he was simply Tom. A neighbor, a friend, a man who stood against fear. That night, fireworks lit the sky once again. Families sat on blankets, children clapped their hands, and the air was filled with joy. Tom looked up at the glowing colors and thought about the journey they had all walked. From the day the black car stopped at his yard to this moment of peace, the story had been one of courage, trust, and truth. The next morning, Tom returned to his porch with his notebook. He wrote down his thoughts in simple words. A neighborhood is not strong because of rules. It is strong because of people. Fear is heavy, but unity is light. When neighbors trust each other, no one can control them. He closed the notebook and looked out at Pine Street. Maria waved from across the road. Children rode bicycles with ribbons on their handlebars, and Peter's bright blue door shone in the sun. Tom smiled to himself. The neighborhood had faced a storm, but it had found its strength. And though challenges might come again, Tom knew that the people of Pine Street would never bow to fear. They had discovered something stronger, each other. The story of the fake officers and the fallen president became a tale told across the county, a reminder of what could happen when one man tried to control a community. But more importantly, it became a story of how people, when united, could rise above fear and choose freedom. And so, life on Pine Street began again, not under the shadow of strict rules, but under the bright light of trust, respect, and simple kindness. For Tom, it was enough. He was proud to be their neighbor. He was proud to be their chief. And above all, he was proud to see a community that now stood tall, not because of him, but because they had found their own strength.